Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. We interview the world's leading apologists to provide credible answers to curious questions.
Who did the earliest followers of Jesus believe him to be?
Right, this is a question that actually has implications that pertain to Islam and Christianity. Both Islam and Christianity have a stake to play in this debate because the Quran in Surah 352 and also in Surah 61:14 tells us that the disciples of Jesus were Muslims. They were followers of Allah. And so this is a problem if indeed the disciples of Jesus were not Muslims, but actually affirmed that Jesus is God, because the Quran obviously says that Jesus is not God, right? And how can we determine the beliefs of the earliest disciples concerning the identity of Jesus? Well, interestingly enough, the Apostle Paul gives us a window of insight into the beliefs of the earliest followers of Jesus. We know that Paul was affirmed by, and he also approved of, the eldership of the Jerusalem church. So, for example, in 1 Corinthians 15, after mentioning the death or resurrection of Jesus and the post-resurrection appearances, he says, "For I am the least of the apostles, not even worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But with the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace towards me was not in vain. For in the contrary I worked harder than any of them. There was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we preached, and so you believed." And so he thus assumes that the Corinthian Christians understand his message to be consistent with the message of the eldership of the Jerusalem church, and also speaks in very approving terms of them, describes himself as the least of the apostles. In 1 Corinthians 1, he rebukes the Corinthian church for having divisions and factions among them. Some say, "I follow Cephas," others Apollos, others Paul, others, "I follow Christ." And Paul says, guys, we're all on the same team here. So he's very clearly on the same page as them. Galatians 1, again, he meets with Peter and James in Jerusalem. Galatians 2, he meets with the eldership of the Jerusalem church who'd been apostles before him, and they tell him that they have nothing to add to his message. In fact, they consider him to be the appointed apostle to the Gentiles, just as they had been appointed apostles to the Jews. And it seems unlikely to me that he made that story up to support his apostolic credentials, because in the same chapter he mentions the fallout with Peter over circumcision in Antioch. So if Paul was approved by the eldership of the Jerusalem church, and Paul affirmed the deity of Christ, which he did, for example, 1 Corinthians 8:6, he alludes to the Jewish Shema, "Hear Israel, Yahweh is our Lord, Yahweh is one." He identifies Christ as the kurios of the Greek Shema. Yet for us there was one God the Father and one kurios, Jesus Christ. Or there was one God the Father from whom all things came up, through whom we exist, and one kurios, Jesus Christ, from whom all things came, through whom we exist. And Philippians 2:5-11, the Corpus Christi, he identifies Jesus as God there. And so if he affirmed the deity of Christ, it suggests strongly by extension that the eldership of the Jerusalem church likewise affirmed the deity of Christ. And if the disciples affirmed the deity of Christ, that's a huge problem for Islam, of course, because the Quran says that they were in fact Muslims.